Well, John McTernan is a former political secretary to Tony Blair, and Guy Miscampbell is a senior research fellow at the think tank Onward. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
John, if I could start with you, how do you view this particular election campaign? You were central to Blair's success. How does this one differ for you?
Well, this is a very odd election in recent UK history in that nobody's fighting for the centre ground. You've got a Tory party which is broadly led by its right wing, the ERG, and they've driven it to a Brexit position, but also they've got quite a free trade, free market, Singaporean-style capitalist vision of Britain's future. And you've got a Labour Party which hasn't taken advantage of the Tories moving to the far right and has moved itself to the far left, said, well, they've moved to extreme, we can be extreme too. And they've gone for a return to the 1970s, state socialism, government owning everything. And so what that means is there's a huge number of voters in the middle who are not being catered for, which I think is one of the reasons why the Lib Dems have surged in recent months. And so it's a funny election from that point of view. And the other one is I've rarely seen such an incompetent start to an election campaign. I mean, has there ever been an occasion when a cabinet minister has resigned during an election campaign? I know the Tory government have done cabinet resignations like no other government before them, but this is really quite extreme.
Guy, as John mentioned there, this campaign really doesn't seem to have started well, especially for the Conservatives. How would you advise the parties to deal with the negative publicity that's being generated? Because it really is driven by what people think when it comes to the vote.
Well, it depends exactly what you're talking about when we mention the kind of negative publicity. I think there's a lot of stuff that's quite easy to avoid in terms of negative publicity. There have been some pretty major press slip-ups, and there have been people not thinking before they say things, and that's something where they just need to get better at not saying some slightly misguided things and or apologising profusely when they do. I think more widely, though, actually, it's easy to focus on the day-to-day of the election, so who said what. But what's more interesting and probably more impactful is to look at the fundamentals, so where they're facing in the polls, what the leadership ratings look like. And actually, on most of those metrics, a lot of the stuff that Westminster's obsessing about isn't really cutting through. They're still on course for a decent majority at this point, I think.
John, back to yourself. Guy mentioned there some of the gaffes in the press about people stopping to think before they speak. How difficult is that to manage?
Oh, look, it's incredibly difficult because if you think about election campaigns I've been involved with, in 2001, John Prescott punched a voter. You can't get more off script, really, than that. And the thing about the 24/7 media coverage, and now the expansion of social media is there's not a moment when politics goes silent, and it means you need much greater message control. And look, it's true that people have to be careful what they say, but if you're in the cabinet, you're meant to have gained that for being a good political operator. That's what was shocking about Jacob Rees-Mogg's gaffe this week. It was the feeling that you actually heard the truth about how he thinks about people who live in council housing, that they are a bit less clever than him, that they're stupid, that they died because of their stupidity. It wasn't just a crass remark. It was the revealing nature of the attitudes, the fundamental underlying attitudes. And I think that's for the most dangerous gaffes. So when you see the truth, in the same way as the most dangerous splits are one like when Ian Austin, the former MP, who said yesterday he's been a Labour Party member since he was a teenager. He was an advisor to Gordon Brown, an MP, a minister. He's now telling people, patriotic Labour voters, of whom there are very, very many, particularly in the Midlands and the North, to vote for Boris Johnson. And that tells you something that Jeremy Corbyn's closest colleagues feel about him, about how they don't trust him. And again, that goes to the heart of doubt. So people doubt that they've got doubts about whether the Tory party really are for the whole country. They've got doubts about whether Jeremy Corbyn is actually for the UK. Is he actually patriotic? When those doubts get crystallised, something really cuts through.
Guy, as John said there, when those doubts get crystallised, something really cuts through. Also mentioned, I mean, we are in the era of fake news, social media. It's 24/7. How do you even devise a strategy to deal with all of that?
Well, I think to some extent the Conservative strategy in this election has been written for them. There are kind of two major things that are happening, I think, which are obviously Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn. And those two things naturally mean that there are a lot of voters in the North and the Midlands up for grabs, and there are a lot of people who used to vote Conservative who are very supportive of Remain who are no longer going to consider it. So the strategy is very clear in terms of the seats that they need to win. But I think John completely hits the nail on the head that there are lots of things, and we saw this in 2017. They were targeting the same type of seats, but a few slip-ups here and there, a bad manifesto, and people thought they were the same old Tories. So I think the solution here is, you've got to have a manifesto and a policy offering that really shows that you as a party can actually deliver for those people, and you've got to be relentlessly on message. And as you say, that's why the start of this campaign has been so worrying. I think the person who's running the Conservative campaign described the path to victory as steep and narrow, and it's really any kind of slip-ups could endanger everything.
OK, thank you both indeed for your time. That was John McTiernan, former political secretary to Tony Blair, and Guy Miscampbell, who's a senior research fellow at the think tank Onward.